But anyway, so just to refresh from where we left off last week, we covered a lot of ground last week talking about what's going on with birds today, different reasons for the worrying declines that we're seeing. We talked about bird migration and molt, and then we started getting into some of the things that the trust, the Willistown Conservation Trust, is doing to advance bird conservation. One of them was regenerative agriculture at our Rushton Woods Preserve and Farm in Newtown Square on Dulchester Road. It's a model for hopefully the farming of the future that serves to support wildlife while producing food for people and minimizing the detrimental chemicals that conventional agriculture uses, and then also focusing on sequestering carbon dioxide and making healthy soils, which have the ability to sequester more CO2 than the plants living on it and the atmosphere combined. So at our amazing Rushton farm, where we do all this form of agriculture, that's where we do our bird banding. So some of you guys may have been to the Rushton farm bird banding, but it's a operation that occurs 3/4 of the year from, so we're out there during spring migration in April and May, and then we're out there during fall migration, which lasts end of August all the way through till the end of October. And then we also do some breeding bird surveys during the summer. And then last but not least is these cute little saw-whet owls, which is what we are doing now. This is a boreal forest species, the northern saw-whet owl, and it migrates in certain years south in larger numbers than others. And we sort of fish the night sky for these guys as one of our banding programs. And we've had a pretty good year so far. I was out there on Friday night and we caught 16 of these little guys. So that bird banding is a little different than the songbird banding. So the songbird banding is passive, where we just set up the mist nets. And I think I showed in a past slide from last time. I'll show them again in case anybody wasn't there, but that's what a mist net is. Very fine.
Quick question on the salad owls, Blake. You told us how you can tell older birds from younger birds. Salad owls always look like little babies. Do they? Yeah. Do they have all the same sort of signals about what their age is and so forth?
Yep, we look at their feathers. They have a certain molt pattern. So yeah, just like some of the slides we showed before of the songbirds, the owls are we look for a different pattern. The hatchier birds, all the feathers are uniform. And then a second year bird will have like a patch of flight feathers in the middle that are retained, and then the outer ones are replaced. So we're just, same thing, looking at the different molt patterns to age the bird.
No matter what their age, they look like a beanie baby.
Yep,
okay.
They're just cute little birds. Yeah, so that's active because we are setting out an audio lure at night to catch these guys, and then the lure is surrounded by the mist nets, whereas during songbird banding, the nets are just passively all around the farm and the hedgerow area and into the woodland, just monitoring all the different habitats of Rushton Farm. So here's a picture of some of the bird bands up close. So this is really the main way of studying bird populations today. It's been going on since like the 70s, bird banding. There's many different band sizes. They all have a unique 9-digit number on them that identifies that bird as a unique individual going forward. So anybody capturing it can look into the shared database called the Bird Banding Lab. And you need a federal permit to do this. This is just, I can show you a little blip of our Willistown Conservation Trust bird program. This is our little video I can show you. I'll just go straight.
And the 30 acres that you see behind me now are in a shrub scrub habitat along with hedgerows. The bird banding program is a program of Willistown Conservation Trust, and it was formed early on just as a monitoring project to look at how birds were using all the habitat that we've been conserving. We're capturing birds in what's called mist nets. They're invisible to the birds, and basically birds are migrating through the night, and as the sun rises, we open the nets and they drop down to feed and spend their day in our habitat. Basically, we capture them, look at their wing size.
Wing 61.
How much fat they're carrying, what's their age.
These are adult feathers, and this is what we call a molt limit, and that's how we are able to age this bird.
The abundance of each species and how many species of each bird, and that goes into a bigger database to look at the overall population trends that are occurring.
24.6. So bands come in a range of sizes, and each bird has a specific size that it wears. This one's a 1B. The band number is 57.
Of the 15,000 birds that we have banded, 3,200 of those have been recaptures. And when we say recapture, we mean that the bird already had a band. Generally, our banding records through this traditional banding is giving us population information.
All right, so that was just kind of give you a little
important aspect of our banding.
I can't get out of it now. Just a little glimpse of our bird banding project. So here's, it says screen sharing is paused. Hopefully you guys can still see my screen. Hold on, resume share. Sorry, guys. Not sure why it did that. Hopefully you guys can see that. So the top, this is a bird's eye view of Rushton Woods Preserve. So again, this is our 6-acre farm, regenerative farm here. And then our main bird banding station is located back here in this hedgerow type habitat. You can see these, this is sort of a shrub habitat that birds like to use during migration. I'm talking about these two sort of legs that extend from the farm to the woodland that creates this hedgerow habitat. And they're sort of wildlife corridors. Birds move along those edges, foraging for insects and berries during migration. And then incidentally, the owls also like this sort of edge habitat that the farm creates, the northern saw-whet owls. They're more of an open sort of edge habitat hunter. So a lot of different habitats that we support at Rushton Woods Preserve. And so that's why it's a great place to study how the birds are using this conserved land, this very unique sort of farm within a wildlife preserve. So we have a few Pennsylvania state responsibility species, things like the scarlet tanager, the wood thrush you see there in the middle, the worm-eating warbler on the right. These are birds where Pennsylvania plays a role in its global security by supporting 10% of the North American population of these birds. So these are all birds that we are monitoring through our bird banding. We have some beautiful neotropical migrants like the Baltimore oriole that we catch every year. They love the edge habitat again that the farm creates. We have some declining Pennsylvania birds like field sparrows that nest here because we have many of these open field habitats. Remember, we mentioned the wild meadows that are right next to the cultivated farm fields to encourage the pollinators. And it also provides habitat for birds that need this grassland type habitat that's declining in Pennsylvania. Yellow-breasted chats. All kinds of, we've banded over 15,000 individual birds of 101 species now over the 11 years of our banding project. So these are just a few of some of the questions that we're answering about birds through bird banding. So generally, the main conservation formula is that in order to save a species, you need to know how many there are, where they are, and what they need to thrive. And so those are the main questions that we try to answer with bird banding. And then we get other information like land management feedback. So like this yellow-breasted chat is a bird that likes early successional shrub habitat. And once we stopped mowing a certain part of the field and sort of let it get bushy and wild, these guys came in. So if you build it, they will come. And then we get good longevity data, stopover ecology, population information. And of course, we also band for people. We invite people to come and see these amazing birds that they may not normally see in their backyard. These aren't really birds that will come to your feeder. And it's a really transformational experience for people and a great way to connect them. So stopover ecology is a term we use. Remember, we talked about birds put on fat only for migratory journeys, overnight flights. So for example, this is a veery. It's a forest thrush. So like this season, we caught a veery maybe like a day in September. And then a week later, we recaught that same veery. So we could tell by the band number, it was the same one. It had gained about 50% of its body weight. So that bird could easily have left that night and traveled a couple 100 miles south. And so this is a picture again of that bulging circular hollow where they sort of like their fuel tank. And this bird has a lot of fat. So when we recapture birds, our own birds that we've banded in the same season, we learn about the habitat quality. Obviously that bird was getting what it needed to be able to put on the fat stores to continue its migration. Longevity, we'll learn about how long some of these little birds, little tropical migratory birds can live, which is really amazing. This summer, we got on the left is an ovenbird. We captured this ovenbird that we had banded 10 years ago. So now that we've been banding for over a decade, we're starting to see these really spectacular records. And then on the right, another veery, same thing. We caught him last summer and had originally banded him in Rushton Woods 10 years previous. So these are, at least 11-year-old birds, almost reaching the record of the bird banding lab longevity for these species. And it's just incredible to think that these birds migrate to the tropics and come back to Rushton Woods each year to raise their young. So trying to learn as much about birds as possible, as fast as possible, since, the reports say we're running out of time and we need to do things more efficiently. And so in comes Motus. This is sort of the cutting edge tracking technology today. So this is essentially radio telemetry. This is a nano tag. They're teensy tiny. They come in different sizes. They just sort of fit on the bird like a backpack. They've even put these on some insects like dragonflies and monarch butterflies, trying to study their migration. And so all you need for this is you put the nano tag on the bird, and then you need the infrastructure of the towers that you see in the upper right of the screen. Those are the radio receiving towers, and they can pick up the signal from these radio tags from, I think it's something like 30 to 40 miles away. So what the trust has been working on is increasing this infrastructure, because there weren't a whole lot of towers, 7 years ago. But a few years ago, we started the Northeast Motus collaboration to increase, because the more towers that you have in the Northeast, the more you're able to track birds along our Atlantic flyway. So the birds that are sort of using this invisible highway going north and south. So this is a picture. You can see the antenna extends past the wood thrush here that is nano tagged. We nano tagged several wood thrush for a study. And what's great about this is that everybody can use this. Anybody who's studying whatever species can use this infrastructure. The radio receiving towers, they all work on the same wavelength. So everybody, there's hundreds of researchers using this and using these towers and understanding more information on animal movements, migratory movements across the landscape, which of course is more important as development increases. Knowing where these birds are going and traveling And this is a little bit more of an unbiased way of studying birds. And then also you don't have to recapture the bird. So it's a little less invasive. You only put the nanotag on the bird once, and then it flies by the towers, and it's just connect the dots of the bird's path. So there's been something like, I'm sure that number is already really outdated now, 500 million detections. It's probably like 700 million detections now since only like 2015. Whereas for regular bird banding, there's only like 70 million data points since like 1969. So you can see how much more efficient it is. It's just a matter of building it out a little more. Motus is still sort of in the beginning baby stages, so it's going to be able to do a lot more in the future. But you can see our sort of fence line of towers that we built across Pennsylvania. So it's almost like any bird migrating from north to south or south to north is going to pass through that fence line if it's got a nanotag on it. And then here's a, let's see.
Birds have the power to touch our hearts with their beauty and songs, to surprise and fascinate us with their behavior, to inspire us with amazing feats of strength and endurance. Some songbirds migrate thousands of kilometers every year in challenging conditions. Birds play critical roles in our ecosystems. They pollinate plants and spread seeds. They help control insects. Birds are also valuable indicators of change. Many populations have been seriously declining for decades. 1/3 of North American bird species need urgent conservation action to avoid extinction. We have to act now to protect the habitats and systems that support all life on Earth. But how? Scientists must unlock the mysteries of migratory birds and study their movements on breeding grounds, along migration routes, and in wintering areas. The Motus wildlife tracking system uses tiny tracking devices and a network of hundreds of receiving stations strategically located throughout the Western Hemisphere. Motus is yielding spectacular discoveries. Now, researchers can safely track bird movements over vast distances and with incredible detail to pinpoint the greatest threats to vulnerable species. The results help us identify conservation priorities and direct efforts and funds for maximum impact. Get involved today.
All right, helps it come to life a little bit. Couldn't have said it better myself. So as she said, we're learning some incredible things through Motus. We're learning about migratory connectivity, I mentioned briefly in the last class, understanding the full life cycle of these birds. So not just where they're breeding, but where they're overwintering, where they're staging before heading off to migration. Birds spend about 1/3 of their life during migration, and half of that is spent in stopover sites. So these stopover sites are just as important. We mentioned also in the last program, they studied how neonicotinoids are affecting migratory birds, and they actually used Motus to discover that a bird exposed, white-crowned sparrow exposed to a seed that was coated in neonicotinoid, an insecticide, they were able to see that it greatly delayed this bird's migration timing. So Motus can be used to answer many questions. They like to say that it helps us spy on birds. We want to know what they're up to all the time and where they're going, learn some of these small scale landscape movements, post-fledging dispersal. That's like, where are these young birds going after they leave the nest? What habitats are they seeking? And then there's that word stopover ecology, again, understanding what they need during migration. And then Rushton Farm in particular, we hope to use these nanotags in the future on northern saw-whet owls to understand them a little bit more and less biased. So what we're doing now is kind of calling them in with that audio lure. We could be luring them in from miles away, whereas if they had a nano tag, then you're just seeing what they're doing, again, spying on the bird, seeing what it's doing without being lured in. So that's sort of our future plans there with Motus. And then now I thought we could get back into, in the movie we just watched, she repeated that sort of harrowing number. 1/3 of all North American species are in need of urgent conservation action to avoid extinction in the future. And there's many reasons for bird decline. We've already sort of mentioned a lot of these, but just to reiterate that habitat loss is really the greatest by far. So now I like to get into sort of what's going on in North America and how we as individuals can help this habitat loss issue. So over 95% of the pristine places in North America are gone, unfortunately. And we have this sort of lawn habitat that's taking over. We've got over 48 million acres of lawn habitat. And that includes about half of that's residential. And then that also includes like roadways and golf courses. But this lawn habitat, as we're managing it today, is sort of biologically barren, this green space without a whole lot of ecosystem function. But if we start maybe looking at it differently, this doesn't have to represent a loss, but it could be a place where conservation could happen. So these are some facts on the average American lawn. Uses a bunch of water to take care of this grass habitat. And then also each hour of lawn mowing generates as much pollution as driving your car nearly 100 miles. So again, what if we all just designated a part of this lawn habitat for more of a wild habitat? This is a graph showing, really explaining why our lawns are sort of unsustainable. So this is your sort of Kentucky turf grass, non-native turf grass. Its roots go not even a foot into the ground. So it's not really resilient to climate change, to drought, to anything. So it takes more input to take care of it, whereas these are our native grasses, and you can see how much deeper they reach into the ground with their roots. Some of them can mine groundwater. So we all have this sort of innate love of wildness, but we've been pushing nature out of our yards. And it may be time to kind of change that rhetoric around. Like this graphic, are you still dressed like this? Then why does your yard look like this? So there's a lot of different theories of why we have that affinity for this manicured lawn landscape. One is that it's from our sort of 18th century roots, wanting to look like the English countryside. Others say it's even more instinctual than that. It goes back to our ancestors in Africa. We like the sort of African savanna. We like this wide open habitat so we can see predators. But whatever the reasons, with our growing human population today, it may be time to start looking at our lawns through a different lens, through the lens of ecosystem function, rather than what was the cultural norm aesthetically. So this is a picture of milkweed in front of our Willistown Conservation Trust office on Providence Road. So you really want to support, in order to support food webs and bring back biodiversity and ecosystem function, it starts with the plants. Native plants are best because there's been this evolutionary arms race over millions of years between insects and bugs. So, insects and plants. So plants obviously don't want to be eaten, and the insects need to eat the plants, so they have to develop chemical defenses, enzymes to be able to deal with the plant's chemical defenses. So this is a lot of work. So over time, most insects only specialize on one or two plant lineages, and these are the native plants that have been in our system for a long time. We all know the example of the monarch butterfly. So you may have a monarch butterfly in your yard at non-native plants like butterfly bush, or whatever other flowering plants you may have, but you're not going to be supporting the full life cycle of that insect unless you have its host plant, which is milkweed. It can only raise its larva on milkweed. And that's just one example. So nature is made of millions of intricate interactions like this. And the more we can build it from the base up, the better. They're even finding that bees specialize on certain native plants. So there's even, some native bees bring back certain pollen, like will only bring back the pollen of the dogwood tree flowers in the spring to raise their larvae. So again, millions of intricate interactions, and the more non-native plants we replace natives with, the more of these interactions we're sort of cutting back. And if you're interested in bees, there's a great new video out on PBS.
In the spring of 2020, as the country goes into lockdown, outside the garden is coming alive. As a wildlife filmmaker, I knew there were revelations here that could be just as amazing as anything I'd ever filmed.
These bees would just go,
Discovering the secret life of bees took me on a journey I was not expecting.
Yeah, so it's called My Yard of 1,000 Bees, if you want to check out some incredible footage of bees. Never lets me go to the next. There we go. So you may have seen some of these headlines: massive insect decline threatens collapse of nature. So it is pretty worrying. This is a graph from 2019 showing just some of the insect families, their decline. So the total overall global insect population declines about 41%. You can see some certain ones like beetles are down 49%. That's like half of the animal kingdom. Caddisflies, this is an insect that Lauren McGrath will talk to you guys more about next session when she gets into aquatic macroinvertebrates. But this is an insect that its larval stage starts out in the water, and it requires fresh, pure, unpolluted water. They're down 68%. So, and this is worrying because insects run the ecosystems that support everything, including us. And here's some reasons for that. Of course, we mentioned last time agricultural intensification. Our conventional agriculture uses a lot of pesticides and fertilizers that directly and indirectly result in insect declines. And then also our use of non-native plants in horticulture and forestry are also resulting in some of these harrowing insect declines. Some German scientists discovered a 76% decline in insect biomass from like 1989 to 2016. So it's not great. So we definitely need to start supporting ecosystem functions. These are all of the insect roles: decomposing, pollination, pest control, and wildlife nutrition, like for birds. So it may be not a coincidence that birds are declining at the same time as insects are. So if you look at that report that we've lost 3 billion birds in the past 50 years, many of those species that are heaviest hit are ones that eat insects. So there could be a link here. And native plants could be an answer. We could start restoring food webs through native plants, managing our landscapes with more of the natives. And not all insects are equal in a bird's eye view. So a typical northern forest bird attempts to raise 4 to 6 young in each clutch. And this requires an enormous foraging output of energy. And so they're going to look for the easiest packets of protein, which are caterpillars. These are easily digestible. They need to be able to get their young to basically adult weight in like a week. So they prefer what's easiest. The caterpillars are sort of like TV dinners, no preparation required. Just stuff it in the baby bird's mouth. So they go for the caterpillars, and caterpillars also have carotenoids, which, because caterpillars are eating plants, they get these carotenoids from the plants. And incidentally, these are full of antioxidants, plumage support, immune system function, all this good stuff that a baby bird needs. And they've done studies and found that chickadees in a suburban habitat, this is Doug Talamy, his lab found that there are population effects on say chickadees that can't find many native plants. They've got to forage farther for these juicy caterpillars, or they've got to feed their young. Stuff that may not be so easily digestible, like spiders, and it has, they fledged less young, or the young fledged later, and these had detrimental effects on the population. So caterpillars, native plants. Caterpillars are host plant specialists, like many insects we mentioned earlier. So in order to have more caterpillars, to have more birds, you've got to have more native plants. And there are some keystone plant species. There's like 5% of our native plants support 75% of the insect biomass that drives the food webs. For example, in the lower right is a picture of an oak. In Chester County, 511 species of moths and butterflies are supported by an oak tree. So 511 species of caterpillars can be found on an oak tree, whereas non-native ginkgo you see in the upper right only supports about 5 species. So there's some heavy hitters. And plus, caterpillars are just incredible. I recently read a whole thing on caterpillars, Bernd Heinrich, and because caterpillars have been predated by birds for 100 million years, over 100 million years, they just come in this dazzling diversity. And why wouldn't you want to support these incredible creatures in your yard? On the very right, you see it doesn't even look like a caterpillar. That's a leaf edge mimic caterpillar. So some of them are very careful about how they eat the leaves, because birds are very good at finding caterpillars based on leaf damage. So some will mimic the part of the leaf that they've eaten, and some will munch on a leaf, and then if it's too much to eat in one meal, they'll actually clip the leaf at the petiole. The caterpillars will clip the leaf at the petiole to erase all trace of its presence so that birds can't find it. So caterpillars aren't easy. They don't make it easy on birds to find, but they're very good at finding. And then we've got some cool caterpillars, like on the left, this is an Abbott Sphinx moth caterpillar. It mimics the young grapes. So this specializes on wild grape. And there's a beautiful like pea green spots in that. It's an early instar of that caterpillar. It looks like that. And then the picture to the right that kind of looks like a snake, that's a later instar of that same caterpillar. And this is the instar that has to walk across the lawn or wherever it is to get to a site to pupate. So it's very exposed. So evolution has made it so that the little horn on its back is modified to look like a snake eye. So to try and scare these small forest birds into not eating it. So again, millions of intricate interactions creates a dazzling diversity that we see in nature today. So in your yard, you can easily support over 50 different bird species if you provide these different native plants that support their food. We'll skip that. So again, trees are probably the biggest bang for your buck, because that's the most biomass. So native trees are great for supporting the food web, regenerating biodiversity. Black gum is a beautiful one, turns bright red this time of year. Dogwood, crab apples, black cherry is a great wildlife tree. The berries are important, the flowers are important. Of course, it's great to have native evergreen trees for cover for birds in the winter. And then shrubs are probably the next most important thing, because they have berries, which are avian superfood, native shrubs. So the Big Mac of native shrubs is the northern bayberry. It has over 50% fat in its berries. And so these are really important for migrating birds that, again, need those energy stores. And then arrowwood viburnum. Viburnums are other great shrubs. Their berries are also full of like 30–40% fat. So again, really good food sources for birds. Gray dogwood, northern spicebush. This is a dominant understory shrub in our forests that have beautiful yellow leaves now and bright red berries for the migrating birds. There's even a Native American burning bush. Winter berries, some berries ripen just in time for these birds that need the food source in the very cold of winter. And you'll see bluebirds popping these in their mouth, winter berries. And this is a picture of a Swainson's thrush in an oriental bittersweet. So this is a non-native plant, and they have found that not only do non-native plants not support the insects that birds need, but their berries are not as nutritious as our native. So shrub habitat structure, they've also found if you have like a shrubby area of your landscape that you just can't wait to clear, you might want to think again about that, because Cornell Lab of Ornithology has discovered that these shrub habitats are super important for young baby birds, really teenage birds that have just left the nest. We've even found, so an ovenbird is a type of bird that depends on interior woodlands. It's associated with thick, dense woods. So we'll ban these in Rushton woods in the summer. But then in the fall, when we move out to those hedgerows where we said the migratory birds move through, we get some of the same ovenbirds we banned in the summer, the young ones that are out here in our sort of shrub habitat. They hone in on this shrub habitat because it's a little bit safer than an open woodland. It has lots of food, berries, insects, and more cover. So we also had a worm-eating warbler this year. We've had this other years as well, just hanging out at Rushton. We banded him and then caught him again a month later during fall migration before it left. This is another bird associated with deep woodlands, but it hangs out in this early successional shrub habitat before migration when it's a young bird that's just trying to figure out life, needs that nice, easy habitat. A native wildflower meadow is another great option for supporting the food webs and the biodiversity. This is our wildflower meadow at the Willistown Conservation Trust. That's it in July. And then in this late August, September, then we start seeing the yellow goldenrod. So it's this beautiful changing tapestry through the seasons. We actually did it with plugs, little native plant plugs through the years, just adding a few hundred each year. Some people will seed a meadow, but it's just this pollinator paradise. And you can put, trails through the meadow so it doesn't look like this wild place that you haven't taken care of if you don't like that look. So we've got trails to make it deliberate. Longwood Gardens has a meadow like this, a wildflower meadow with beautiful trails throughout it that you can explore in the summer. Again, just pollinators and insects abound. It's like a sanctuary. So this is the little hummingbird clearwing moth out of wild bergamot, hummingbird at bergamot flower. You've got goldenrods to support the migratory butterflies, the migratory monarch butterflies, milkweed to support their larvae, Joe Pye weed. We have some beautiful native sunflowers that support many of our native bees, Rudbeckia, beard tongue. This is our mountain mint. We found a very rare hair streak butterfly. So if you build it, they will come. So just life, supporting life. The more native plants, the more life you support. Insects, and then right on up the food chain through the birds. So this is sort of what a native meadow habitat looks like from the ground, what's going on underneath the ground. So again, just these deep, deep roots, unlike your turf grass, reaching into, almost 10 feet deep into the ground. So really solid landscape, really a regenerative landscape. So taking care of the soils, sequestering carbon dioxide and creating habitat for a variety of wildlife. And then this is what it looks like in the winter and fall months if you leave it. So that's a general good practice, is to don't mow it until the spring. So you have to mow it once a year, or else the natural succession of things is that it would become a shrub habitat and then it would become a woodland. So we do mow our native wildflower meadows once a year, but in the spring, because then it's like a giant bird feeder when you leave it in the fall. All the spent perennial seeds. You can actually see, if we get a snowfall where most everything is covered, you can see the overwintering sparrows and juncos hopping around and eating the seeds from the grasses and the spent perennials that are sticking up out of the snow. Even if you do something as simple as leaving some weeds in your yard, it can help migratory birds. So I actually watched, this is a white-crowned sparrow. I see it in our lawn here every year, feasting on the chickweed seeds. They eat dandelion seeds as well. So anything you can do helps to increase biodiversity. So, and then there's this 70-30 compromise. So it doesn't have to be this all or nothing. You don't have to get rid of all of your lawn. That's just ridiculous. Everybody, likes to have a little patch of green, and we all love diversity. If gardeners love different species, so you can have 30% of that non-native biomass. But if you strive for 70% of the native biomass, then you're really supporting population growth in things like chickadees and other songbirds, and supporting regenerating biodiversity and supporting the food webs that need it so much. So this is a great website, brand new, Homegrown National Park, to check out. That's Doug Tallamy. It's the largest cooperative conservation project attempted to date. So there's this, you can go and see there's a map, and you can get on the map. So he's trying to go for 20 million acres. That's half of the 48 million acres of lawn. Doug Tallamy aims for, if everybody did half, just supported half of their yard in more of a wild habitat, you could have this homegrown national park of 20 million acres. So that is what that effort's about. And then the other link there is a link to our resource library on our webpage, a bunch of different places online to buy and learn about native plants. Other things you can do for birds, of course, we always get a question at this point, well, can I feed birds to help them? And yes, of course, that's a great thing to do, but it's not the best bird food. The best bird feeder is what the slides we just saw, which is a native meadow, native plants, the ones that support the caterpillars. Because you can feed birds, as much as you want, but you're not going to be supporting, they need the caterpillars and the insects to feed their young to result in population growth. But feeding can certainly help different populations of birds, especially if we have a really bad winter and it's very cold. Food availability is low. It can certainly help. And then always providing a water source for birds. Window kills. So this is another major problem in that chart where we talked about all the different reasons why birds are declining. Habitat loss is the big one. Another big one is actually window kills. So they'd estimate it's about 1 billion birds a year in North America die from window kills. So, and half of that is residential. So not even just big cities like skyscrapers and these big glass buildings, but just our homes. You probably all have seen a bird hit your window at home. So birds just see habitat in the reflection. They don't understand that it's glass. It's just endless habitat. And they fly into it and often die. But there's a lot of different ways around that to help minimize some of these window collisions at home. There's decals, which are a little tougher. You've got to make sure it's in a certain, it's spaced out a certain amount apart. There's decals like that, or there's decal like little dots. And then this Acopian bird saver is this is called a Zen Curtain. So it's just little screws with like parachute cord that hangs down, and it can like blow in the wind, or you can secure all of those little pieces so that it doesn't blow in the wind, but just vertical lines. And the bird sees that and is less apt to want to fly through that, because it breaks up that sort of endless habitat view that they have. So that's a great one. And there's some really hopeful things going on, like lights out campaigns. So you may have heard I guess it was a couple falls ago now already, that there was a big event in Philadelphia, a big migration event, where people woke up in the morning and there were thousands of migratory songbirds dead at the foot of these skyscrapers throughout Philly. There's always window kills during migration of this nature, but that was a big event because perfect storm of weather and heavy migration resulted in it. But a lot of people got together, Audubon volunteers, and started to talk to these building managers and said, hey, this is a win-win. Why don't you turn your lights out between midnight and 6 a.m. during bird migration, fall and spring, and you can save electricity and we can save birds. So Philly now does this from April 1st to May 31st, and then from August 15th to November 15th, they turn out their lights in some of the big skyscrapers participate, like the Comcast building. So it's one step forward. And then cats are another major problem for birds. That it's actually the #2 cause of decline for birds after habitat loss. So they estimate 2.4 billion birds each year in the US alone are killed by cats, and that includes domestic and feral cats. So these are very adept hunters, very skilled, and they just kill for fun. Well, feral cats are killing to eat, but domestic cats will just kill for fun and leave the prey at the kill spot often. So owners may not even think that their cat is doing as much of this as they are. So it's essentially a non-native predator in our habitat. There are some ways around it. Of course, keeping your cat indoors is the best. But there are they found that these bird safe cat collars, they look kind of goofy. It's like a little clown hat around your cat, but apparently they're comfortable for the cat, and it helps the birds to recognize that a predator is coming. So whereas a bill, they don't really recognize that as a predator, but these bright colors, the birds recognize and can get away most of the time. Now there's little cat patios or catios. You can allow your cat to have some outdoor time. Other things you can do in your yard, bird boxes to help cavity nesting species like bluebirds, chickadees, tree swallows. They need these. Snags are the best, a dead tree, because this is what they naturally would nest in, holes that came about in a dead tree, either from decay or woodpecker activity. So if you have dead trees on your property that aren't in any danger of falling on your house, it's a very important component of habitat. Over 40 bird species rely on cavities in these sort of snags or wildlife trees. So important elements of the habitat that we can preserve. Drink bird-friendly coffee. This is another really great high impact thing that you can do. So this is essentially supporting regenerative agriculture in the tropics. So this is what, unfortunately, most coffee farms look like now. So this results in millions of acres of the rainforest being cleared, where many of our bird species overwinter. But coffee traditionally is a shade-loving shrub that grows beneath the canopy of a tropical forest, looks more like this than the last picture. And there are small family farms who still produce coffee in that way, the shade-grown coffee. And they've done studies, especially the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center, that a shade-grown coffee farm can support 243 bird species, whereas full sun only supports 60. So even just making a conscious consumer choice of where your coffee comes from can help preserve bird habitat and protect biodiversity for our birds that really are birds of two worlds. Our world up here in the summer and then down there in the tropics in the winter, like the Baltimore Oriole. So you'll look for some of these labels. Fortunately, bird-friendly coffee is getting a little bit more popular. So there's a Golden Valley Coffee Roasters right in Westchester that has a shade-grown bird-friendly coffee. There's, you can look on the Migratory by Bird Friendly online. There's one, Amazon actually carries one called Tomorrow's Coffee. There's Birds and Beans. So essentially you want to look for this label, this bird-friendly Smithsonian label, because that means people from the Smithsonian Bird Center actually go down to check on and certify these farms that they are indeed doing regenerative shade-grown coffee. You can become a bird watcher. So Ebird is a great way to advance bird conservation, and you don't even have to be an expert birder anymore, because now there's apps like Merlin and their sound identification app. So you can go out and you can identify some of the species that you see and log it into Ebird, which is one of the world's, basically the world's largest wildlife database. Just conservation scientists enter, or not even, you just conservation citizen science, like you and I, just entering our information into the database. And they actually used some of that information for that, the research that came out years ago, a couple years ago, about the major bird declines. And interestingly, another great example of eBird's use is that over in California, because of all the droughts, some of the migratory shorebirds have been having trouble. And so I think it was the Nature Conservancy actually overlaid eBird data with NASA satellite imagery to see where these migratory birds, these shorebirds, were during migration, what habitats they needed. And they paid rice farmers along the migration pathways to keep their fields flooded during the fall migration to help these birds. I'll play this.
By joining eBird, you're joining a global team of people that share your passion for birds. Be a part of it.
Whoops, I'll start that from the beginning. A little video about Ebird, please.
Every day, millions of people around the world enjoy watching birds and recording their sightings.
What if there were a way to take all of these observations, yours, ours, everyone's, and put them all in one place?
If we could do this, we would fundamentally transform not just birding, but science and conservation.
From this idea emerged eBird. Put simply, eBird is a way for anyone around the world to store their birding observations, their photos, their sound recordings, and make them available to educators, scientists, and birders. It's incredibly easy to use, and it's incredibly powerful. All you do is let us know where you went birding, when, how far you traveled, and what you saw. It's powerful because hundreds of thousands of people all around the world are doing it, and it's growing. eBird already safeguards 500 million sightings, information that allows all of us to understand the movements and needs of birds at global scales. eBird maintains your lists for you and shares them with other birders from around the world. By sharing, it's now possible for anyone, anywhere, to find your target birds and the best birding hotspots any time of the year. Before eBird, there was no way to comprehensively understand population-level movements of many species. By combining your sightings with remote-sensed habitat data from NASA, we're able to generate species distribution models that provide an unparalleled view of where and when birds are in the landscape. Scientists and students all over the world are now able to use eBird datasets for their research at a variety of spatial scales. These observations help inform better conservation strategies, opening the door to the future of bird conservation. And this is just the beginning. With the help of millions of people who come to Ebird each year, we are creating a free, open access system that is easy to use, fun, and rewarding. Rewarding for birders, for scientists, for conservationists, and ultimately the birds themselves. Go to ebird.org or download Ebird Mobile to get started, all for free.
By joining Ebird.
All right. And I'll just leave you with, if you take care of birds, you take care of most of the big problems in the world. And that's by conservation biologist Thomas Lovejoy.